In this edition of On the Ground, I'm visiting with my friend Shahzeb Irshad in Karachi, Pakistan, to talk to him about what the realities are in what's happening with Pakistan in light of the global pandemic and COVID-19. What's happening, how's the government handling, how are everyday citizens handling it, how are the most vulnerable being affected in a country like Pakistan, which is one of the most dense countries in the world in terms of population. I think it's the fifth highest population in the world. And, in a country that's roughly the size of British Columbia, you have 200 million people. So they have some unique challenges and opportunities, I guess, as well. So we'll learn from Shahzeb what's actually happening on the ground in Pakistan. Thanks so much. Shahzeb Irshad, how are you, my friend?
Yes, Alhamdulillah. How about you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks for agreeing to take the time and talk with me today. I wanted to get your perspective on what's going on in Pakistan. You're in Karachi, the largest city in Pakistan. You and I met back in 2011 when I was living and working in Pakistan. We worked in the development sector together. Well, we did a lot of things together, didn't we? We did.
Absolutely.
Work for Charter
Management consulting, PR, yeah.
Yeah, we did we started a consulting firm together. We worked with Charter for Compassion, and we did their work with them. And then we did some work for our good friend there, Mr. Prime Minister now, Imran Khan. We worked on for the 2013 election. We worked on various things for PTI and the party.
Absolutely.
We'll get into that a little bit as well. But why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're up to?
Great. So for the last 8 years, I've been involved in structuring funding partnerships between institutional funding agencies like USAID, DFID, and local nonprofit organizations here. One of my biggest projects that I worked on has been at the Aman Foundation, where it had about 12 business units. So they had different non-for-profits that they would actually call business units, because something is geared towards everything from primary care to emergency medical care to telehealth, and then all the way towards improving educational outcomes in public schools through entities that they would either create themselves, or they would bring in, let's say, Teach for America, and they would open their Pakistan branch. And the idea was to take $100 million of that foundation and create a lot of the business models that can actually sow the seeds for public-private partnerships. Then I worked in higher education as well, and these days I consult for organizations that want to raise funds, in addition to organizations that want to do something more innovative in the social impact stream.
Okay, yeah, perfect. I mean, that's why I want to talk to you, because I really want to get a good idea of what's happening in the development sector in Pakistan, how the pandemic is affecting the most vulnerable in the country, and you being uniquely positioned in Karachi, which is what, 25 million people?
Yeah, thereabout, yeah.
Yeah, one of the biggest, most dense cities in the world, where you and I both worked and lived. So I want to get a feel for that as well. So Pakistan, 200 million people, 21,000 cases, and 486 deaths. So obviously, this is an issue of testing, quite possibly, and obviously, I mean, the death reports are probably quite low as well. I mean, you and I both know it's very difficult to get a good handle if people aren't going to the hospital and they aren't reporting deaths to authorities. The death count is likely much higher than 500 or so that
absolutely
that are there right now. But let's say it's a multiplier of 5. Let's say it's a multiplier of 10. It's still quite low. What's happening on the ground there to account for such low numbers?
So that's actually a mystery for everyone, because the way the lockdown has been enacted in Pakistan, you actually, if you go out anywhere in Pakistan, you wouldn't really feel that there's a lockdown. Because in all the other countries where you actually see footage of traffic on the roads, and you wouldn't really find anything. But in Pakistan, when you go out, you still have traffic blockages. Obviously, the traffic police and the authorities are trying to discourage as much movement as they can. But the sort of country that we are, we've got two problems. The first is that we're not, for lack of a better word, as disciplined. So it's not Sweden, where the government would just say, stay in, and people would do so. Because let's say for lack of exposure, education, people still don't understand the seriousness of this. And you know how conspiracy theories take place. And I've even got a lot of family members who just would say that this was just something that other countries would do to have Pakistan shut down its economy. Uh, on the other end, there are people who just can't afford to sit down in a lockdown. So even restaurant owners who were doing very steady business but were relatively small, and now they're closed down. Now they've actually started delivering from their houses. So they're doing barbecues and then delivering in the houses, and it's actually given rise to, let's say, not a black market, but something similar, where you would want to do business without the authorities knowing about how you were doing it.
But isn't it, so you're not allowed to do home delivery?
The home deliveries actually started, I think, a week ago.
Okay.
But even the time in which home deliveries weren't allowed, under the table stuff was still happening.
Mhm. Well, I mean, also too, the factor is it is Ramadan, right? In Pakistan, well, all over the world it's Ramadan, but in
Yeah.
Pakistan, me having been there for a couple of Ramadans, it's very important, and the whole country celebrates it, and the world is pretty much shut down during the day anyway, right? Especially for
Yeah.
eateries and those
Yeah.
kinds of gatherings, and then it opens up at night. So
Hmm.
is that what's happening still? So after iftar at night, the restaurants are still opening up. People are still congregating and getting together to break fast.
No, that's not happening.
Mm.
The one change is that during the daytime, things are pretty much the same. But during the nighttime, I think the lockdown is enforced more strictly, I guess, because the
Mm.
number one factor is that people don't go out to the mosques anymore. Even the ones that do, the numbers are a fraction of what they used to be in previous Ramadans. The other thing about this is that, let's say, there is a certain strata of Pakistani society that is educated. So even if I believe I have 6 family members and I believe that coronavirus is something serious to be really taken into consideration, then I will actively try to discourage meetups like that. So let's say in populations where you have a high development index, you're going to have a smaller number of congregations or meetups because people are going to take care of themselves. I'm really not sure how this translates into rural communities or peri-urban areas.
So how are they dealing with that? I mean, to me that makes sense. In this, Pakistan, like a lot of developing countries, has a very high, or sorry, very low literacy rate. I think, it's like 20 or 30%, right? The literacy rate, it's very low. So let's say that you can identify the areas that are more complying with the rules and the lockdown. Can they not just be strategic in where they really enforce the lockdowns and find the areas that are so hot spots and just focus on keeping them locked down?
So they've done that. There are 3 elements to it. The first is that, let's suppose they tried to seal off 13 union councils, that these union councils have a very high incidence. The one thing that happened was that those union councils actually, they did a lot of tests to figure out exactly this is what it is. The problem is that it is very hard for us to, or the Pakistani authorities to actually enforce a complete lockdown. Number one is because any enforcement depends on the agencies that actually do that execution. The problem with that is that the infrastructure that we have to do any sort of enforcement, even just look at our tax net, right? The sort of complexities that Pakistan deals with, you can always find out loopholes. And if you're able to create a system that is devoid of any loopholes, then it comes down to integrity. So you can pay someone off and do whatever you want to do. And that is a problem, unfortunately, that we haven't been able to tackle yet.
Yeah, and that's a good comparison in the way that people avoid taxes, finding the loopholes. And so so you're contributing it to a few things. You're contributing it to the fact that it's low literacy
Dependent
rate and
on testing.
low literacy rate and
Yeah.
education. So it's difficult to explain the seriousness to some people. And then the testing rates are low, so they're still trying to catch up there, which is understandable. And again, a country of 200 million people and one of the
Yeah.
densest populations in the world. And then just compliance overall is difficult. Also, too, I'm guessing that there's, many conspiracy theories out there tied to religion and, and overall, let's face it, Pakistan has been a target of, very,
Yeah.
in reality, has been a target of, different, let's say, global initiatives to either suppress or to infiltrate Pakistan politically. So it's understandable that people might be a little bit paranoid of that being the case as well. But the fact is that this is a global phenomenon. So I think most people are aware of that. But it's interesting though, because the entire South Asian region has, very low numbers, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, which also has a huge population as well, is reporting very low numbers. India is reporting very low numbers. China, relatively speaking, reporting very low numbers. The only place is, close to you, a neighbor, is Iran, right? Iran has 100,000 cases, 6,000 deaths,
Yeah.
right? So
Massive.
they seem, so, and I think that probably is attributed to better testing in Iran as well.
Yeah.
So what's happening then? What's the government's response? What are some of the initiatives that the government has taken on to both deal with the economic issues and the issues of identifying and quarantining people?
So there are 5 things. The first is that the government has actually created partnership mechanisms with other nonprofit organizations that are working. So the Sindh government has actually created an application, and they've already selected organizations that have been working in, let's say, ration provision. So when they selected those organizations, they gave them their own login details so that they could actually check if any duplication was taking place in the areas in which the nonprofits were working. And if, let's say, a family was getting duplicated entries. So for example, one nonprofit gave something to family A, so they should be able to log it in the application so that the same family does not become the beneficiary, because at the end of the day, nobody has that deep pockets. And cases of that nature have actually come about where someone in their house had 200 kilograms of rations because people just go out into these communities and start giving away rations. The problem is that that person actually wanted soap, and he didn't have soap in any one of these ration packs. So he would actually take those ration packs to other shopkeepers and say, just barter with me. So it has actually given rise to instances like this. The second thing that the government has done is systematically try to improve testing, but then again, that's dependent on how many kits you have and how are you able to execute it. Whether the kits actually are received by the federal government and then the federal government actually sends it to the provinces, or the province receives it as a corporate donation or an individual donation, that's something separate. So I'm not sure if a coordinated strategy for testing has been finalized between the provincial governments and the federal government, because the number one thing that has been clear from the moment this pandemic started in Pakistan is that the federal government and the provincial governments have not been on the same page. Something as basic as the lockdown, the federal government or the prime minister said that we wouldn't really go into a complete lockdown and we want a partial lockdown just because we can't afford it. But the Sindh government, which actually is represented by the Pakistan People's Party, they said that no, it's important for us to go on a complete lockdown. So yes, the provinces have their own autonomy on how they take their decisions, and that's why so many different decisions related to how this pandemic or strategies for coping up with it are going to be discussed, they're going to be implemented. There's a clear dissonance between the provincial and federal governments. So the topic has actually been more politicized than I feel it should have been. So just something as small as opening up some small elements of the economy. So let's say trading. So this press release came out that the Sindh government would actually help people, help traders trade digitally. Now, the problem with that is that the sort of traders that you have in Pakistan, what is the literacy rate among those traders? What sort of platform are they going to be able to use? So it's everything is right now in a state of flux because there are just too many stakeholders, and at the end of the day, might is right. So whoever ends up getting their decision executed, that's whatever the strategy is. The third thing that the government has done is that they're actually introducing a lot of digital platforms to be able to help other organizations. They're actually opening up a lot of public-private partnership opportunities. The fourth thing that they're doing is that they're using law enforcement agencies to actually just help enforce healthy behaviors. So let's suppose anybody who's traveling in a car, obviously you can't stop them from traveling. This is not Dubai where you basically institute a complete lockdown and people need coupons to get out of their homes. But at least when they find three or more than three members in a car, they'd stop you, they'd ask you if you have your mask, they'd check your ID, they'd see, okay, which area were you living in. And then the fifth thing is just keeping the public informed, which I think is more to do with Pakistan having a freer media than what it had. So because the media is reporting on everything, you've got regular press conferences and a lot of these nighttime talk shows in which politicians are coming in and representing their party's viewpoint.
So just for everyone's information, Sindh is the province which Karachi is in, and Karachi is the major city there. So Sindh is controlled by PPP, People's Party of Pakistan?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
And what about Punjab?
So Punjab is a coalition. Actually, you can, the PMLN would have more of a stronghold there. Federal government is PTI. Balochistan is a completely separate story.
Right. What's happening in Punjab? Is there any differences of how the Punjab government is handling things versus the Sindh government?
So the Sindh government has actually taken the most conservative stance, whereby it was the first government to lock down everything. It was the first government to enforce such serious lockdown mechanisms. It was the first government to go out and really put the pedal to the metal on the testing bit. The Punjab government has been a bit more liberal in its approach at tackling it. Obviously, I'm not trying to downplay whatever the Punjab government has done, but from the first moment they understood or they had a sense that there are going to be many people who may not be able to afford the sort of lockdown that the Sindh government has done. So I'd say it's just a different approach, definitely not so in intentions.
Okay, and then so what has been the overall economic effects across the country? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What industries are affected? Let's. I mean, the reality is that most of people in Pakistan are living at or below the poverty line anyway.
Yeah.
Abject poverty is a massive issue. The vulnerable populations are massive migrant populations that come into the major cities to work. Also, too, what's happening with the servant class as well? The middle class in Pakistan and upper class rely on their servants. What's happening? Are people still keeping their servants at home? Are servants still coming to households, or are they staying at home? What's happening around that as well?
So, because you understand Pakistan, one thing is has been always happening that whenever you would have affluent societies, or let's say defense is an affluent society, but you would have an urban slum right in defense, because that's where this labor class would actually live, and that would be a closer proximity to come in. Now the problem is that obviously you can't seal off defense, and this is having your servants or your maids or your drivers not come is such a personal decision that no policy can actually be made or enacted to begin with. So I know of families that have actually just summarily fired people and said that, because you come from an unsafe UC that the government declared had a higher incidence of the coronavirus case, don't bother coming in tomorrow. And then I know of families whereby they said take the paid leave and just stay home. And then there are families who say, we're going to take measures, but at least come in like twice a week. So it's a very mixed approach and definitely not coordinated. As far as the economy is concerned, let me tell you, I think the restaurant industry is one of the biggest that's been hit because everything is closed. And this is an industry where you would be dependent on just daily cash flow, if not, then at least weekly or monthly cash flow. And March is when the lockdowns actually started. So 16th of March it started. So they were able to clear the payroll for March. But in April, a lot of the people that worked in the restaurant industry, not just servers, because those were the first to go, Even people who work in management have been let off. The Hashu Group, which has the PC and the Marriott, they laid off a lot of people, and news comes about every day where some big company laid off people in the hundreds or thousands. I think if you talk about any industry that completely depends on satisfying your wants and not your needs, then that has been hard hit. The training and development sector has practically been wiped out overnight.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that's pretty much, across the board, across the world, travel, hospitality is taking an extreme hit. And you're right, like the luxury items as well. And obviously, training and these kinds of things that depended on events happening are also taking a dip. What about other things like banking, commodities, these kinds of sectors? What's happening with them?
So any industry that is able to and has been able to transition online is going to make it work. So for example, you've got a lot of banks that are saying that we're going to bolster a lot of our digital services. And if they already had that, then they've actually doubled down on educating their user base on how to access that. So I think this is a golden opportunity for things like online education, digital banking, grocery shopping online has definitely seen a surge. People ordering anything online has taken a surge because Pakistan historically has not had such success, let's say, in e-commerce. It definitely did with the advent of Daraz when it got bought by Alibaba, a lot of other logistics companies. But people now actually are beginning to see this as a lifestyle choice. So for example, dining out as a category, I'm not sure if we'd be able to go back to that level of normalcy that we had in pre-corona times.
Yeah, and it's the same thing in Canada as well, right? The people who, were white collar, were middle class, and can afford to work from home and have access to computers and access to internet and all these kinds of things are managing much better than the most vulnerable, of course. But the problem in Pakistan is that most vulnerable class is a much bigger number and a much bigger percentage of the population. We're talking conservatively of 100 million people living at or below the poverty line that probably don't even have access to internet, much less have a bank account, and low literacy or no literacy at all. What's happening with them? And that's really, where I want to focus on, Shahzeb, because you're uniquely qualified to talk. What's happening with, the people on the street that you see daily who rely on charity and handouts, and what's happening with the people who worked in the office buildings and did the cleaning and brought the tea. What's happening with the slums? Like, how is this overall affecting? Is there I'm assuming, because I was always so surprised and dismayed of like the situation of healthcare in those areas, right? The hospitals would be packed, giant lineups outside for people waiting, people sitting in the hallways and things like that. So, what is happening in that sector in terms of taking care of that sector, the most vulnerable?
So unfortunately, the most vulnerable population that was actually working has been the first to be let go in most cases. What's also happening is that, let's suppose you're talking about people that either have been formally employed and have been let go. So let's say the tea boys or the sweepers, all the menial labor that you would get. But let's talk about the population that actually was earning day to day. So micro business owners. So people who are mobile cobblers or fruit hawkers, they sell vegetables, anything on the street, they're not registered, nothing, right? And those people, because they rely on getting out and displaying their goods to the public, and that's how they make their money, it has been wiped out completely, because that's the sector that we were working with. We work in enterprise facilitation programs, we train people, we set them in micro business models like this, and overnight our field officers weren't able to go out. The replenishment for inventory, let's say for fruits, vegetables, anything that people were selling, now you can't do. So the only way you'd be able to sell things is by having a physical shop. And a lot of the people who are actually selling on the roads were completely disenfranchised from this right of selling. And now you've got nothing. However, over the last week, what has happened is that a lot of these street hawkers previously what they would do is, because they're not registered, they would always pay a bribe to the police department. So whatever your area's central police office is, they're taking a cut of the bribe from people who are actually selling things on the road. And I believe that that's what started happening, and now the no police force or no agency is actually stopping them from selling. But the first 2 weeks of this were completely brutal for those people. Then you obviously have seen in Pakistan that begging is rampant here. On top of that, what we don't realize is that there is organized begging. So it's a full mafia, and just like the street food hawkers or anybody selling on the street would pay the police, there are, let's say, groups that would actually place these people at certain points to beg, and they would actually pay off the authorities to actually have that done. And that's taken a huge increase, right? Because whenever a crisis would come out, everybody would want to be more charitable, and then this is the appeal. So I think this sector, if you want to call it that, is going to be doing very well, because the charity or the help where it was really needed isn't going there, because there are just so many filters of organized begging, or just people who don't feel that shame in begging. They would just come out and get whatever they want or whatever is available. But the people who you call, let's say, Safed Posh, I don't know what the English terminology for that would be, but people who actually would feel that there's something wrong, that they actually have to go out and beg for things or ask somebody for help, help isn't reaching those people. How do you assess those people? How do you find out those people? How do you get adequate help to those people is a complete mystery right now. The government, the federal government, for its part, under the Ihsaas program, has tried to give out 12,000 rupees a month to families that it has selected from its system. I'm not sure how that selection has been made, but even with the amount of families that have actually received that help, in addition to what the Sindh government does through the Benazir Bhutto income support program, which is essentially also just cash handouts, I really don't feel like we're going to be able to completely get to the people who are not covered under these programs, or be able to assess their need or to get help to them. So it is a situation where you really feel like you have food insecurity. People don't know where their next meal is going to come from.
Well, yeah, and the issue is that, just for everyone's reference, so, in a place like Pakistan, where it's, usually very hot during the day for most of the year, the nightlife is, very, it's a big part of the culture. So, people will go home after work at like 5 or 6 and, have a small meal with the family, but then everyone goes out, after 8, 9 o'clock when the sun's gone down and it's cooler out. So, I was always amazed at, how packed all the eateries and the bazaars and everything are at night, well into like, the nighttime hours, and people are shopping and eating. And that's really when the socializing happens, is at night. And then the offshoot of that, obviously, is not just all of the people that are able to work and live off of that nightlife in terms of serving the population, but also, there's a lot of food and leftover, and there's a lot of people giving money to the street beggars, and there's a lot of that stuff happening as well, because of the sheer amount of people out. So, and I've loved to see, early in the morning, you could see at a restaurant parking lot, for the poor are lined up and receive the leftover food from the night before. I used to watch that from my hotel room, and I just thought it was so amazing, and I don't understand why more countries don't do that. I remember waking up one morning and being like, and it was like 6, 7 a.m. in the morning. And this parking lot was just packed with people in front of this restaurant. I was like, what's going on? And then it occurred to me that, they're feeding, their leftovers from the night before to the vulnerable and the poor. Which I thought was a great way, rather than just throwing it in the trash and having them go through your trash. But even that, I guess it would probably be difficult to do nowadays as well. So really, what's happening? Like, when that was where you received your nourishment, that's where you received your food, and these restaurants are shut down, and there is no leftover food, and there is no dumpsters and dumps to go through, or it's been cut down severely. Then how are these people finding food? How are these people getting through their day?
I honestly think that the crime rates are about to go up, because when there are absolutely no ways for you to feed yourself, then you do what you have to do to survive. In addition to that, let's take the topic of home ownership. It's not that high in Pakistan. Most people in Pakistan rent, and we don't have the sort of mortgage market that the US would have, that it's easier for people to actually get into a mortgage, and that's also because of religious reasons. And they might be able to get the food in Corona times because of any rations, anything else. But if this continues, they definitely won't be able to afford rent. And this isn't a developed country where a government can come up and say that you can't evict people. So the rule of law, when those things aren't even considered, we're going to end up seeing a lot of displacement. That's probably also a reason why, because of these menial labor, would actually people would travel from interior areas to the mega cities. Maybe that's where most of that displacement is going to go. I've already seen that with a lot of people who were drivers here in Karachi. So they actually belong from interior Sindh, and now they've all just gone back because there's absolutely no work. So they'd rather just spend that time with their loved ones. What they're doing over there, God knows. But it definitely has created a situation of flux for everyone.
And that's a really good point, Shahzeb, that you're making, right? And then, something else that people in the West need to understand, that in countries like Pakistan, where, there is such high population density, that how hard, people always talk about corruption, and that's the reason why, these developed countries aren't getting ahead. They don't understand that how difficult it is to enforce anything. I was very impressed in Pakistan about, and every law that exists in the West exists in Pakistan. I was always tell people that, distracted driving laws, the first time I heard of distracted driving laws, not using your cell phone, etc., was in Pakistan. Then Pakistan had it before we had it out in Canada, right? And even things like, I always remember too, like being able to take, a picture of my paycheck and deposit in Pakistan way before I was able to do that in Canada. So people don't understand that, all of the advancements are available there, all of the laws are there. The problem is enforcement, right? The problem is enforcement. Well, in case of e-commerce and online banking and things like that, it's about compliance and literacy. But for laws, it's enforcement. I always use, and this is like the one illustration I give to everyone about how this happens is like, so imagine that you're a traffic police. You're this poor guy who's been given the job of controlling traffic at an intersection where we see it all major intersections. And your job is to find motorcycle riders who aren't wearing helmets, and carrying 10 people on their motorcycle, to find drivers who don't have driver's license and who are speeding. And meanwhile, there's also camels and donkeys and bicycle riders and pedestrians. And no one who if you haven't been to a country that has these massive populations, you don't understand, like, how will you enforce that? How are you going to stop? First of all, a 2-lane street becomes a 10-lane street at every stop sign and every red light, and everybody just tries to get to the front. Nobody pays attention to, lines and things like that. So if you have a traffic enforcement police officer there, like, the job is impossible. No one's going to stop him. There's no way that he can stop every car, or, he's lucky if one car he tries to stop will actually stop. Even if you issue a ticket to get people to pay that ticket, is another problem in itself, right? So people don't understand that when you have 200 million people, and I try to illustrate this for people all the time, that Pakistan, in terms of land, is smaller than one of our provinces in Canada, right? I mean, Pakistan is smaller than British Columbia, our neighboring province. You got 200 million people in a country that, that's smaller than a state in the US or a province in Canada. And so people don't understand, like, how difficult it is to get people to comply to anything. Everyday rules, everyday laws, never mind something during a pandemic when their livelihoods are at stake. So that's a very important point you make in terms of, so you're not yet, has there been any reporting of an increase in crime, or is this just something that people are expecting to happen?
I think it's all down to what sort of theme is going well in the media. So once the coronavirus theme actually dies down, the media is going to look for newer themes, and only then will these patterns come to light. Because just like you need more testing to figure out more cases, and then more cases to figure out more deaths, you need that reporting. Because just like maybe China has those heat maps where crimes occur and you're able to check that in real time, but that sort of reporting just isn't available in Pakistan. Although the traffic police has actually made some serious technological advances. So wherever they actually want to find people, they'd actually stop people. You'd have 2 to 3 police officers because that's how much you need to actually stop the car. But now they actually have devices in which you would actually enter your national ID card number and the amount that you were fined, and when you pay the cash to the traffic police officer, he'd input that into the machine and you'd actually get a receipt. Because previously, I never wanted to do that, because whatever cash you would just give to the police officer, you know that that's just going into his pocket. So there are definitely efforts, especially with the Digital Pakistan effort that the federal government has started now. How effective is it going to be in order to enforce it? That's one question. And the other is if we actually even have the resources to be able to do this. Because everybody talks about aid, which has dried up because, let's face it, every country is right now figuring out what to do with their own populations. So it's more about we need all the available resources here than rather than just sending them out. But I think private philanthropy is the only real local sustainable way to actually get this done. And we're seeing a lot of local companies come out and provide funds to either the governments themselves or just go out and buy things and through their own, let's say, logistical footprint, be able to distribute as much as they can. I know an organization that use their own logistical footprint nationally to buy personal protection equipments and provide them to doctors that who they knew who were working on the front lines for the prevention centers.
Actually, yeah, I know, and that's a very interesting thing. So just, also so people know that, in Pakistan, when you get a ticket, you're expected to pay it on the spot because they don't, they're not going to depend on you actually going and paying it at a later date. And
Yeah.
and I think it's important for us to not make it seem like every police officer is corrupt, because I don't think they are. I mean, most of them are honest people trying to do their jobs. But to have it trackable, that actually the money that you're paying there on the spot is actually being put towards the ticket. That's a great initiative. So I'm trying to understand what are the financial assistance packages that the government. Yeah, well, let's actually go back a little further. So, Mr. Imran Khan, who's now the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the leader of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, and was elected in 2018. So, how is he doing prior to the pandemic, in terms of overall approval ratings, and then now how is he doing and perceived since the pandemic, and what kind of assistance has he put forth?
So before the pandemic, a lot of it was about bringing in new initiatives in the government. So you had Digital Pakistan, you had the Kamyab Naujawan program, which basically means successful young person program in Pakistan, which would actually see a lot of loans being given out to young people in Pakistan. And a lot of it was geared at doing things that the government has historically not done. So going digital, looking at how to enforce, let's say, better systems. But in terms of execution, it has just not shown those results. But that's just maybe because they haven't had as much time as, let's say, the previous governments have had. Because whenever a new government comes in, it's all just let's say a contest between who can deliver more results. So Imran Khan's government is saying that we've started all of these new things, that it would take time for the economy to actually come back up, because let's face it, they didn't get the economy in the best possible shape, right? They had to negotiate with the IMF. They had to figure out their tax net, how to work it out. The rates for the taxes were completely revised. We went through one of the highest currency devaluations that Pakistan has seen. And now you've got the corona crisis, in which where before half of the public was saying that these are all the right moves and things have to get worse before they get better, and half of the public was saying that this never happened in any of the previous regimes. To the corona times, where people have just allied themselves to the political party that they were voting in the first place, because it's the same thing. I read this that you cast your vote in other countries, but in India, you vote your caste. In Pakistan, it's just different because you just cast the political party that your family was just pay allegiance to. Tehreek-e-Insaf was the only party, and Tehreek-e-Insaf is the party that is ruling now, that actually managed to create that young people voter bank that actually never existed before, because young people would never really participate that actively in politics. Because of that voter bank, Tehreek-e-Insaf still had in good enough approval ratings, even though they had got down because of a couple of, I would still call them political issues, but it doesn't really help us to delve into them in this conversation. But after the corona crisis, people have taken some very polarized positions. So let's say the Sindh government is saying that we need to lock down as much as possible. And then the Punjab government would actually, or the federal government would actually take that stance and say that you don't understand how poor people are going to be able to cut it. So it's just the trade-off is health versus being healthy and not be able to and just die of hunger. And that's how the picture is actually being painted. So more, let's say, liberal politicians are actually suggesting that you open the shops, but you ask them to observe the social distancing rules. Everybody should have gloves, masks, everything else. But the problem is always going to be execution, because any government that actually agrees to open these things up, and then you see a resurgence of the infection cases that actually not only result in the rate going up, but also the number of deaths going up, then that government is going to find itself in a huge PR fiasco. So nobody really wants to bite the bullet.
That's an interesting observation, right? I mean, it doesn't actually work in their favor to do more testing, because then those numbers are going to go up, and it's going to be, it could not only, affect them politically, but actually could cause, a panic or, have different effects within the population. Yeah, that's a really good point. So overall, what kind of financial assistance has been provided so far? Are they trying to provide assistance to businesses, or are they trying to provide assistance directly to the individuals and households?
So Pakistan, or let's say the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, really wants to appeal to its voter base at the bottom of the pyramid and saying that we would like to give you money directly. And they're doing this through the Ihsaas program, where 12,000 rupees are going to be provided to every eligible family. How that family is selected, how that money goes to them, that's just something that hasn't really been explained very well. The other bit is that, let's suppose they keep on doing it. I mean, it's a big stimulus package that is being provided, but I don't think this is sustainable. So the government might be able to do this right now, but we don't see, or let's say there hasn't been news of any significant funding coming in to just give cash handouts so far. What is needed is a revival of the economy, and the government really understands it, but until the infection cases can actually, you can actually proverbially just flatten the curve, the government can't in its right mind just sign off on opening everything. But that is something that the government really also has to do if it needs to avoid unrest and complete chaos.
Yeah, and that's another important point that people need to realize is how dependent Pakistan is on foreign aid and also foreign investment, foreign loans, and all of that stuff is virtually, come to a stop, because, like you said, every country's got its own problems and issues and is focused internally. So that's a big issue in terms of keeping the economy going and providing aid to the most vulnerable. The other thing that I think is very interesting that you talked about, and let's go back to that, is you and I, when we were working on the campaigns for 2013 election, we saw the massive rallies that came out for Imran Khan, and everybody thought that, he was going to win in 2013 and take control of the federal government. That didn't happen. I mean, they did well, and they took control of one province, but, very, didn't meet the expectations at all of what those rallies and that kind of support showed, and that was all based on young people as well. So is now, is the feeling that, the younger generation and young people are still behind Imran Khan and the PTI party, or are they disillusioned now with his handling of the pandemic?
They're definitely has been some disillusionment, and I believe that's just because of bad expectation management. Because as a politician, you've got a tendency to say, when I get elected, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and everything has been done. So the bag of expectations or what they had committed that they'd be able to do was just, in my opinion, so unrealistic that even the stuff that they can do very well, even if they're able to do it, it still might not retain the entirety of that voter bank. Although what can possibly happen is, let's say, people who weren't sure of them, because there definitely has been a majority in Pakistan that kept saying that these guys might have the best intentions at heart, but they haven't run a government before. They don't have the people, they don't have the experience, they don't know how things would actually pan out in those areas. And I also thought that that might be a concern, but good leadership would actually solve that. But the problem is that ideas aren't worth as much as the execution. And right now, the execution is the biggest problem.
Yeah, and, and it's also, in fairness, people need to understand that, it's only been the last 2 or 3 elections that a democratically elected government has passed over power to a democratically elected government. In the past, in the majority of the history of Pakistan, what's always happened is a democratically elected government was thrown out by a coup from the military. The military takes control for a few years and then allows another party to come in. With that kind of upheaval, election after election, it's very tough to have any kind of consistency and sustainability of any type of programs, right? And so, and that's, that's one of, and that was the bag that Imran Khan inherited, right? He inherited this history, and you're right. I mean, maybe he overpromised too much, and thinking of what he would be able to accomplish in a short time, and then now he's hit with the double whammy of also this pandemic. I mean, but it is a true test of a leader, and I think that his brand of compassionate, intelligent, forward-thinking, innovative leader that he sold is now put to the test, and and we'll see how he does there. Let's go back to the young population. So Pakistan has one of the youngest median populations in the world. It's 24 years old, younger than even India. I mean, that region itself has a very, very young populations. Bangladesh, Afghanistan, obviously because of war and other factors, as an 18-year-old median age population. So, but Pakistan is 24, extremely, extremely young population. And one of the reasons that I stayed and worked in Pakistan for so long was because of individuals like you that, I was so impressed by, that were actually, wanting to stay in their country and work hard and make things better. I see a lot of concentration still, even probably more so than when I was there working on, the digital industry, the technological industry in Pakistan. And it sounds like Imran Khan is still pushing for that. I still, I have an issue with that, Shahzeb, because it's just, that sort of strategy of pushing digital and pushing, Pakistan as the Silicon Valley of South Asia, to me is so flawed, right? Because I mean, even if you implement that, you're still only going to serve 20 or 30% of your population, and you're not going to serve the other 70% that can't even access digital services, and I always thought that, Pakistan is unique in the sense that, and I tell this to people all the time, unlike a lot of other impoverished or developing countries, and I really, I'll now take issue to calling, developing countries third world countries, because I don't think they're third world countries. I don't even think they're developing countries. I think these are all previously colonized, previously occupied countries, and a lot of the reasons why they're behind is because of that, is because they were stripped of their resources and because of outside geopolitical forces. But let's leave that aside. We're not having a political discussion today. We'll do that another day. But let's go back to this idea of becoming a Silicon Valley, for South Asia. And to me, like a country like Pakistan, and I tell people all this time, Pakistan actually would be better off if everyone just left it alone. It's not a country that needs to see more foreign interference or more foreign help. It actually could benefit from less, because if you built a wall around Pakistan, Pakistan would be just fine, because it has every resource that is required for people to survive and thrive, right? Pakistan has the best cotton in the world, the best rice in the world, best fruits, vegetables. some of the best produce is grown in the world, and then never mind the commodities. You and I saw in our work marble and granite and all
Absolutely.
these kinds of things. And Pakistan actually has a lot of resources that you wouldn't see countries in Africa or even other parts of the world that are impoverished that don't have those resources within the country. The problem is that those resources aren't properly managed. The problem is a few people control those resources and benefit from them. The problem is a foreign interference and pilfering of those resources as well, right? So, it's a shame that no one seems to be focused on that. I've always thought Pakistan could be the breadbasket for the Middle East. You know what I mean? If Pakistan really, really focused on its agricultural industry, put all the technology in there, and resources in there, and said to itself, we are going to provide food, the best food in the world for all of our neighboring countries, not just the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and I really think that is where Pakistan could really thrive. I mean, obviously the rich agricultural history of Pakistan.
Absolutely.
I mean, I come from farmer class in Pakistan, and I don't know if you do. Do you come from farmer class?
Absolutely. I mean, we still go to our villages, and that's exactly what our origin is.
That's right, man. So I always tell people that I'm not even one generation removed from the farm. I was born on a farm in Pakistan, right? So so that's why this is so important to me. I talk about agriculture here, even in Canada, right? Because I think that people, because it isn't sexy, like digital is so sexy, I keep seeing these posts, on my social media about all the great digital companies in Pakistan and, all this stuff. And then, and it makes it sound amazing, oh, we got a unicorn and we got this kind of investment stuff. People don't realize how few people that benefits, actually in the country, right? How few people that benefit. So, I think it's a shame that even, Imran Khan hasn't come to this realization. Yes, serve young people and find ways for them to make a living and jobs and stuff. And it totally makes sense, to me, why, developing countries focus on digital makes sense, right? Because you need very little infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can, as you and I know, can work from home and launch a digital startup, and, all they need. And actually, it's not that easy as people would seem, because of rolling blackouts, because of not having dependable electricity. You also don't have dependable internet. Not everybody can afford a generator to make sure that their internet is reliable. Not everybody can afford a computer. Not everybody can afford internet, right? So, to me, like, these kinds of complications make the return on dollar invested in the digital economy in Pakistan must be very low.
Absolutely. Because for the last decade or two, what has started happening is that every government has wanted to focus on vocational training, because that's just one of those things as a silver bullet that when you apply, you're going to have more jobs. The problem is that that strategy that the government employed created a lot of vocational training institutes that would actually train people in trades for which the future livelihood potential would either be non-existent, or if it would be very low. So, for example, training so many people in plumbing and carpenting. I mean, those sort of trades were always there, and you could actually get them in informal apprenticeships. You never had to go through a formal institute to get that done. And that started happening, and so much aid has gone into it, so much government funding has gone into it. You would know that the Stanford Social Innovation Review actually ranked Pakistan as the third most generous or charitable country in the world relative to its GDP. So I think the UK and Canada had the top two spots with 1.3 and 1.2 respectively, and Pakistan had 1%. Even India is 0.5 compared to its GDP. And all of that charity going in, the problem is poverty alleviation never seems to take place. Why is that? Because none of the streams that are actually needed to be holistically developed for social development actually take place. So, for example, there is no cohesive plan to improve education in a way where the most vulnerable populations actually have access to it. So I know of a story whereby a grant was given to create a school, and that school would have toilets just because it would increase female attendance in schools. The problem is that that area happens to be one of the most water scarce places. So now they have washrooms, but they don't have any water. And girls still don't go to the school. So a lot of what constitutes development needs to change for Pakistan. For example, we need to come up with innovative ideas that would actually put little to no infrastructure cost for our populations to actually be included in, let's say, the formal economy, or new jobs to come in. One of the biggest problems here is that we're focusing so much on working for the freelance population, but the freelance population actually got to that stage after being born into some sort of privilege. People who haven't been born into privilege, there's actually been a study on street cobblers, and most of them are actually under 16 years of age. They're basically children who actually have a box that has a brush and shoe polish in it, and they'd go just doing it, cleaning everything, everyone's shoes. And if a law enforcement, somebody from a law enforcement agency just catches them, because they're not legalized, because they're not regular, because they're not working age, they're going to end up being marginalized, and that police officer will say, come on, shine my shoes. And so much of what has happened, let me give you an example of the anti-begging unit that has been created. So the law had actually been passed, but nothing happened until a lawyer actually brought it up that, the government has been allocating budgets to it, and nothing has happened. So now you've got cars with anti-begging unit plastered to it, and they basically just round up kids who are begging, put them into a car, and nobody knows where they take them. So a lot of what is happening is about our young populations that actually have not been born into privilege, are living on less than $1 a day. What is being done for them? Because basic provisions of life need to be provided for them to think about attending school, where you get some measure of literacy, right? And even the literacy rate that Pakistani government quotes, most of it is constituting of people who can just write their name in any language. That doesn't constitute literacy. So if you have a lot of young people who are not trained, and you don't have any jobs for them when they actually go above the age in which they've outgrown education, now they just need jobs. So you've got a high a majority of population that is not trained, and you don't have jobs for them. What's going to happen? So that's the sort of let's say demographic time bomb that I feel we're heading into. And if innovative models for getting them to work are not created today, it's not going to work. I mean, there's even been a study that the Pakistani government needs to create 1 million more jobs per year for the next 13 years, on top of what it has already planned, to keep up pace with how many young people are entering working age population.
Yeah, and you're hitting on so many points that I want to talk about here, Shahzeb. So, you and I both know, when we worked in the development sector in Pakistan, the issue is, and in most countries is the case, is that it's the privileged that are in the positions of power, and even in the developing sector, right? And and they go to these seminars and conferences and abroad in the West and other places of fluence, and hear about these great ideas of what other countries are doing, and then they come to Pakistan and try to implement them, right, with no true understanding of what the context is on the ground. And also too, I mean, a lot of the people that are in these positions of power in the development sector, right, they're either foreign born and coming to Pakistan and work, or educated abroad, and have spent actually very little time understanding what the poor and vulnerable face in Pakistan. Right, so that's why, I mean, their comfort level is only dealing with, the middle class and the upper class and serving them. And the other issue is, and you and I saw this as well, is that foreign aid money rarely actually trickles down to the people, the agencies, and the people.
Absolutely.
And in context for people who are listening, Pakistan has I think one of the highest number of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, operating anywhere in the world. Right, so everybody and their dog literally has an NGO or a nonprofit. Yeah. Because and I'm saying this, I'm not absolutely saying this about everyone. I mean, there's a lot of great work being done by NGOs in Pakistan, but there's a large number of these institutions that have been put up for the sole purpose of accessing this foreign assistance, this foreign aid, and then the money never makes it to the initiatives on the ground and the people that it's meant to benefit. That's a huge problem as well. Like you said, even like in for the beggars, right? There's so many layers, and the money never gets actually to the people who need it. So that's another huge issue. that's amazing to hear. And you and I both know that by nature Pakistanis are giving by nature, and so I'm not surprised to hear that we're third, or Pakistan's third in the world in terms of giving, but the money isn't making it to the places it needs to make. So again, like these are the kinds of things that governments should be focused on fixing. Honestly, I would have thought that would have been a number one concern, after having read Imran Khan's book and listening to him speak and stuff, that his number one concern would have been able to fix that, right? Is that why isn't foreign aid, why isn't public funds making it to the beneficiaries, and even identifying organizations that are actually doing the good work. One of the strategies, and I don't know if they implement this in Pakistan, but here in Canada that we have, is that we have umbrella organizations, right? So one organization that we know that has the resources and the capability is given the funds and the responsibility to disperse the money to the smaller agencies relative to whatever specific work they're doing, and then to monitor that work and monitor those funds. To me, that kind of strategy makes a lot of sense for Pakistan, right? Is to create umbrella organizations and distribute the funds that way, and distribute the assistance that way. Is that sort of the approach anyone is taking there?
So I can give you two examples. The first is, let's say, professionally run nonprofit organizations, whereby somebody would have serious money and is professional enough to actually hire professionals to do this. Because let's say you do have a lot of development assistance. So before Trump came to power, USAID's annual portfolio for Pakistan was $5 billion. And yes, a lot of it is direct government to government assistance. A lot of it is also, let's say, reimbursements that the US had promised to Pakistan for its counterterrorism efforts. But yes, a certain percentage of it, a significant percentage of it, was actually coming into private nonprofit organizations. Now, when that money comes in, seldom would it be executed by USAID directly. You would have a lot of middlemen. So you have an agency that would actually put a bid on executing a $60 million contract for vocational training improvements in Pakistan. And then that agency would come in and they would set up their local offices in the different provinces with the local names, and nobody would find out that the money is coming in from USAID for, let's say, political purposes. So if somebody found out that this has been funded by USAID, that asset might be a target of, let's say, terrorism or violent extremism efforts. So yes, that happens, and yes, those projects get created. The problem that more often than not takes place is that the way grant funding works, or the way institutional development or official development assistance from a country to country takes place, because it's taxpayer money, it needs to be accounted for in such a way that I would write a grant proposal today for a project that I need to execute for the next 36 months, and very little is going to change. Now, if you run a business, you know that from today to the next 36 months, a lot can change. But that grant is going to be executed right there and then. And even if you're getting conflicting information, that something that you thought is going to be a risk factor, it's not going to be addressed. So official development has very rarely made a dent in helping Pakistan. The things that actually have worked are, let's say, local initiatives. So I know of a nonprofit organization that actually has created their own field force to actually go out and check if someone is eligible for help to pay off their medical bills or to give them rations. So the field officers would actually go check out their income, expenses, everything else, and then they would direct them to hospitals that needed help, or they would actually give them rations. That sort of approach can definitely be scaled up, and the government should really be doing this. The problem would always come into execution. So I believe that there is a dearth of trained professionals working in the government to improve those systems. But the problem then again is that a lot of the young people, or let's say a lot of the experts who are capable of doing this and can do this, don't want to do it because our government, or working with the government, has a PR problem, that there's always going to be corruption. So it's the chicken and the egg problem.
No, absolutely, and that's always a big concern, and I saw it on the ground there of, the right people, putting the right people in the right position was always difficult because those people wanted nothing to do with those positions, right? Because of the level of corruption and the difficulty to get anything done. Let's go back to this. This really amuses me, the certifying of trades and education and training for trades, and, again, like this is one of those things that, on paper sounds like a great idea, right? Hey, let's get all of these, uneducated, low literacy people trained in the trades and get them out there working, right? But it's so, poorly thought through, because, at the end of the day, when you have a massive, massive gray and black market for those services, no one in their right mind is going to pay for a certified plumber or electrician, right? So again, it's a case of like, yes, that's something that has to happen, but it's very far down in the queue of the other issues that need to be addressed. Now, the one thing that needs to be addressed, and then, and I know this is no surprise to you in the development sector, is the issue of educating women, educating and training women, right? A lot of South American countries have had a lot of success of focusing on their young women and getting them educated. I always remember when I did business in Central and South America, that, the offices of multinational corporations that we worked with were filled with women, because the people who had the means in those countries had decided, like, what, let's not waste our time with our sons, or else keep our sons as the sole income earners, which is the case, that sometimes the son is, feeding a multi-generational household of 10, 12 people. So let him do that, let him work. And let's focus our financial resources on our daughters, and put them into school and get them educated and get them into the professional sector. And I knew, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the issues with Pakistan in terms of patriarchy and religious issues around that, because those are huge obstacles that also need to be overcome before we can do that. But I just don't understand, like, why there isn't, especially for someone like Imran Khan, to just say, like, that, to me, if Imran Khan, I would have thought there would have been like a 3-pillar kind of approach to his prime ministry, right? One would be like education of women, second would be, finding out, innovation and resources for other sectors other than just digital, that, easily would have provided jobs and return to GDP, like farming and agriculture, right? And then, but is there any talk about that? Is there any focus on, other than, your example of, creating a school which has washrooms so that women want to be attend? I mean, again, that's putting the cart before the horse, because you have to overcome all of the cultural and real life barriers of why women aren't making it to the school.
So there are a couple problems here. The first is that, let's suppose any politician comes in, any government comes in, they can't really mandate, like the Pakistani government can't say that all school-going girls should attend school. I mean, even though education is a right that the Pakistani constitution gives to all of its citizens, it is never really provided, because the demographic split, even the school systems that we go to, so you've got a good majority of the population that goes through the matriculation stream, or actually, let's talk about public and private. So public schools in Pakistan are actually thought of as mediocre, low cost, and nothing comes off them, because you're more than familiar with the concept of ghost schools. So the schools will exist on paper for the government, but the teacher, the principal, the furniture just wouldn't be there. So teachers are drawing salaries, sitting in their homes, but there is no education taking place. And that is the number one reason for kids dropping out, because they don't really see the value of going to a public school. Private schools are of two types, high-cost private schools and then low-cost private schools. Low-cost private schools have actually filled that gap between there being no public schools and the need for education, because anybody who's, let's say, your generation, my generation, they actually understand the need for education. And yes, there is still that concept that you shouldn't really educate your daughters, but that's slowly going away. Slowly, it's coming to a level where girls are going to be sent, but I don't really blame that stigma anymore. I blame the lack of systems that we actually have. I think it's been a landmark movement in which the Supreme Court actually came out and said that private schools need to go back to the fee that they were charging 5 years ago, because the cost of education has simply gone so up that for private schooling that we really won't be able to make it. Now, on one end, it is a very anti-capitalistic move, because the private education sector, just like any sector, should be able to put down its own prices. But that's a result of the government's own failure, that public schooling has become so bad that there is absolutely no credibility to it. And that's why you can be as poor as anyone, and you would still prefer your child to go to a private school than you would for anything else. And then the problem with private schooling is that there are very little regulations for that. So you could even have a private school in a small house, and you could have 3 classes being taught in one room. And there is no teacher training for the teachers that are actually, so it's not just the number of people that are entering school, it's the quality of the education that is being provided to those young people. And at the end of the day, when you, let's say, complete, by a miracle, if you complete your 8 years or 10 years after which you go through your board examination, if you haven't really shelled out those rupees that would get you a good education, or by some miracle you've actually stayed away from the societal ills that plague our society, let's say being involved with people who are into crimes, being involved with people who are not into studies. If you even get there and you don't really get the requisite marks for you to get a scholarship or qualify anywhere, then the only thing that you're left with is vocational training, which already has that stigma attached to it. So the only way, in my opinion, for Pakistan to really get out of this is to actually look into fields where young people can actually enter, where there are actually jobs and very little education per se, formal education is required. And I think phones are paving the way for that. Even if you don't have a smartphone and you just have a feature phone, you're functionally literate. You understand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you know how to type basic messages. So Roman English, actually no, Roman Urdu, like you write Urdu in English alphabets. That's being used so much that anybody who has a phone is now able to communicate. So the idea has to be that you actually use those technologies and use currently existing resources that poor people have to put them to work. That's why I believe the Kareem model was very good. That even if people didn't have smartphones, when they actually saw that you could have a smartphone and you could actually get somebody else's car to drive, they would actually take out a loan and get a smartphone. So that would actually put you in a position where you would be able to earn. So those sorts of ideas where you can actually leverage a huge population of young people and then not have to waste so much time in educating them because frankly they've outgrown that age, that's needed. I've recently seen a program in which an organization has launched Pakistan's first diploma in animations, because the animation industry is going huge. You've got movies, games, any sort of a mobile application that you need. And in order to train people for that, they don't need to be formally educated. They can just be taught on the company's own portals. And whoever graduates, the company actually gives them jobs itself, because it's a Pakistani startup and it works a lot with the defense sector. It works a lot for international motion detection companies, and those are the sorts of ideas that actually can really hold a light for the youth to actually get employed at salaries at which they can actually maintain themselves. Because let's face it, Pakistan's minimum wage, 17,500 rupees, isn't enough for 4 people to spend a month.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a brilliant idea, Shahzeb, to focus on getting a smartphone or some sort of a feature phone in every hand. To help alleviate some of that literacy issues, but I also, I don't think that the idea of getting women educated is that insurmountable. I mean, it's basically, put in quotas. You know what I mean? Put in quota at every school that in order to access any type of funding, even if you're not relying on your private school and you're not relying on public funding, you have to mandate a quota. If you want to open up a private school, X amount of seats for women, right? For girls. So I don't think it's that insurmountable. I mean, and you're right, and that's, I think, is something else people need to realize, is that the difference between a private education and a public education in Pakistan is, night and day. And it's very similar. I feel like Pakistan is going the route of the U.S. in that sense, where, those are people who can afford a a good private education or actually is of some benefit. But if you can't, and if you're going to, even a community college that isn't considered an elite one, then the difference in the education you get versus what others are getting is astronomical, right? So, it's not the same in Canada, right? In Canada, I mean, I would argue that our public school system is good as, the private school system in other countries. But in Pakistan, I saw that. I mean, obviously, that I recruited and trained so many young people from universities and colleges, and the university or college that they were able to attend and afford to attend made all the difference in the world in terms of their true English speaking and
Absolutely.
and their literacy, right? So, and again, you can see that from a household perspective, right? Like, why am I going to spend money and resources on sending my children if all I can afford is, an education that isn't actually going to result in them getting a decent job or even getting a decent education, right? I'd rather just, have them learning at the school of life, as they say.
Absolutely. And more of these ideas, what's happening? A lot of young people are actually coming back to Pakistan exactly because of these reasons. Who have been educated abroad, born abroad, raised abroad, and now they're coming back to actually experiment because honestly, you know this, that the cost of living in Pakistan is really low compared to other countries. The cost of actually creating something of value in Pakistan is actually also low because Pakistan has a lot of problems. I mean, you might not have that many problems in the developed world that need solving, but here you go anywhere and you see a problem. So if you can really provide value to people and solve those problems and employ others as a result, that's going to work out. So Pakistan has actually started seeing a lot of foreign, let's say, venture capital these days for ideas that are geared to provide employment. So local people coming in with ideas that can solve local problems and employing local talent as a result. But there are definitely so many things that need to be done in order to improve that ecosystem, because there has to be a better class of investors that actually come in and actually think of it as an ecosystem rather than something that needs complete autonomy of the investor. So I believe that we're going to have that revolution. But in terms of the government, I believe what they need to do is just make it easy for people to come into the country and earn. The more they open the economy, the more globalized we become, and the more our government actually stops protecting non-productive industries and opens them up for competition. Yes, the old guards are going to lose a lot of their market share and people will lose jobs initially. But when more competitive companies come in, they're going to actually see all of this human resource that currently is not trained and then invest in training them, because our strength is in our numbers, and we internally are a very big consumer market.
Absolutely. The strength of Pakistan is not just its resources, but the population, the young population is actually a huge strength. And I never got to my third pillar that I thought that, Imran Khan should be working on, the first being innovation and in agriculture, the second being educating women. But the third should be that you're absolutely right, is harnessing the power of the expat, right? The people like me, who are foreign educated and working abroad, and incentivizing us to maybe not just come and work and live in Pakistan, but at least visit and invest in Pakistan, right? Invest and bring our tourist dollars, and come there, and then but also bring our investment dollars as well, right? And I think that, and I say this all the time, the secret to the future of Pakistan is the expat population. It really is, and the issue is that, obviously, my parents' generation and older generations, they have the emotional attachment to Pakistan, but they, never want to go back and live there because of, the trauma they have and the experience they have of living there. I mean, there's a reason why they came, why they left, right? But our generation doesn't have that, right? I mean, my experience living almost 2 years and working in Pakistan is one of the most enjoyable and memorable experiences of my life and meaningful experiences of my life. And I would have gone back if it hadn't been for circumstances, and I still intend to go back and work and live in Pakistan. So I think that if, the government could put in incentives, or not even incentives, but make it easy to do that and actually lay out a map of okay, so I decide that I do want to go back to Pakistan and help and work. Okay, so how do I do it? Where are the sectors? How would I apply my skills? What kind of funding can I get? And even like an onboarding sort of process, of like, when an expat who has never lived and worked in Pakistan hits the ground, what should they do? I mean, I was very fortunate having, a benefactor who helped me in that regard and showed me the ropes uh, and also having foreign friends who also help me out. But not everybody's going to have that ability, right? So
Yeah.
protecting the expat as well, in terms of safety um, and making sure that they can actually be paid for their services, etc., is something that's going to be concerning. If you want people to buy homes, to come from abroad and buy homes, they have to be protected as well, right? You can't be worried about somebody stealing your land or stealing your house when you went back home to Canada for a month, right? So all of those things, I mean, to me, like that would have made sense for a truly innovative, forward-thinking government to also think about, right? Is harness that. I mean, I'm telling you right now, with the conditions that we have in the West, it's very attractive for people to start thinking about going back and to wherever their home country is and living and working there. But they just have to see that it's a meaningful way of earning a living, and also that it's not going to put themselves and their family in any danger.
I mean, honestly, you can earn whatever you do from home. We're seeing a lot of digital nomads and people who work from homes. Imagine how far you could stretch your dollar if you could keep doing that and come and live here, and then improve the Pakistani ecosystem from the inside.
And never mind the beauty of Pakistan as well. I tell this to people all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you truly want to see untouched beauty, you go to a place like Pakistan, because traditionally Pakistan hasn't been friendly to tourism, right? So
Yeah.
all of those tourist traps and tourist safety initiative, that sterile environment that you find as a tourist when you go to most countries doesn't really exist in Pakistan. If you want to have true adventure, you can go to
Absolutely.
places where there's nobody else, and you can see things that very few people see. Pakistan has three of the biggest mountain ranges in the world intersect in Pakistan, right? Pakistan has almost every climate in Pakistan. Pakistan has, neighboring countries like China and India and Iran and Afghanistan, create a vibrant culture within the country. People, I don't think, understand how diverse Pakistan is as well in terms of
Absolutely. I
languages,
mean,
languages and people, and just untouched natural scenery and unseen wonders of the world. Like and that's another thing. Actually, if I was to give a fourth pillar, is to focus on tourism for Pakistan. I
that's
think.
something they're doing.
Yeah.
The government has really started making concerted efforts to get companies to build resorts, build roads. The Belt and Road Initiative, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, that's one of its components is to also develop places for tourism in Pakistan. And the government is actively incentivizing people to come in. So a lot of these vloggers on YouTube, international ones, have visited Pakistan, made documentaries, and it started to bring our profile up a bit.
Yeah, I've seen those things, but the issue, Shahzeb, is, and again, I mean, there's always early adopters. So, the adventure traveler, like that you and I met, the foreign traveler that comes to Pakistan, that's one thing, right? But there's not enough of them to sustain a tourism
Yeah,
industry, right? You
yeah,
have to appeal to the
true.
masses, right? The same people who are considering going to India or going to Thailand and going to Malaysia and these countries, why aren't they considering Pakistan? And the number one reason is safety, right? I feel, right? Like, it's one thing to be like, oh, I want to go on an adventure. It's another thing to feel like I may not come back, right?
Mm.
Right. So, and you and I've
Yeah,
seen the experience, and to me, that's one of the things that, is a huge issue, is of landing in Pakistan and what you
mm.
experience, as a foreigner. In terms of, that has to be a pleasant experience for people when you land at an airport in a country, because that's going to set the tone for the rest of your stay, right? Is that you are well taken care of, you feel safe, you don't feel like you're in any danger, you're shown and properly shown, and not because what happens when you land in Pakistan is that you're hit with so much stimulus, everybody wanting to take you somewhere, everybody wanting to carry your luggage, everybody, and it's overwhelming, right? So even the idea of having, maybe a host, that eats you and takes care of you and those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
But overall, you have to make it safe for people. People have to feel like they're going to be safe coming with their spouse or their family and their children. And even, because the last thing you want is that in an adventure that you didn't ask for, right? And I think that is one of the biggest issues, is that the country is so overwhelming because the amount of people, because of the heat, because of the poverty, because of, so many factors, that it has to be curated for the traveler, right? It has to be well maintained for the traveler, so they feel safe, and that's key. So it's all well and good to have bloggers come out and talk about how great Pakistan is, but that's not going to encourage me seeing a young guy on a motorcycle riding around Pakistan and having the greatest time of life isn't going to make me want to come there with my 3-year-old daughter. I'll tell you that.
Agreed. Yeah.
So that's a key part of it. Okay, Shahzeb, great conversation, man. And I think we could have talked about so much more. But I do want to give you a chance to give me your parting thoughts. And there's a lot of speculation on what the outcomes of the pandemic will be, good or bad, for the world and for, in your case, Pakistan. What are your hopes? What are your expectations? What are your fears post-pandemic? People's behavior, economy, what things you'd like to see change, what things you think will remain the same?
So I believe that anything negative that takes place actually makes you more resilient. This is one of the darkest times for the economy, for a lot of industries, for a lot of families. But if we're able to pull through this, I don't think we'd be going to the same normal. There is going to be a new normal. Digital education has seen a huge rise. A lot of, let's say, digital services that we never had access to, or we never thought we would want to access, are now becoming available. Let's say the Pakistani workforce's potential, because work from home actually frees a lot of time for you, and a lot of people I've seen, including myself, are working on passion projects that they never had the chance to, either because of necessity or either because of sheer boredom, because you don't have anything else to do or any place else to go apart from Netflix. So I believe that if we're able to really pull through this, and if through governance mechanisms we can actually capitalize on the things, in the changes that we're experiencing, this is in a net sum, very controversially, I think it is going to turn out positive for us.
That's great. And I think you provided a lot of great insights for what's happening on the ground there. Great to catch up with you again, Shahzeb, and
thank you for having me.
And let's make a habit. What I want to do is go through my first series of interviews, and then maybe in a month or so circle back to everyone and see what's actually happening as lockdowns are lifted, as the world tries to go back to some semblance of normalcy. So hopefully we'll chat again soon.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. You too.